Hi, I'm Matt Nesto, editor-in-chief at payments.com. We're talking about embedded payments today, but the B2B style. There's been much ado made about the growth of the embedded payment on the consumer side, but we've seen a major surge of it among businesses. And joining us today is a esteemed panel of experts with three different perspectives. We're joined by Galileo Financial Technologies CPO David Fuhrer, also Entrada CFO Mark Hansen, and Global Rewards founder and CIO and CEO Isaac Itzkowitz. I got my eyes mixed up there, Isaac. Sorry about that. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you coming on payments very much. So I said three different companies. So we have a fintech, we have a multi-family property management outfit, and then Global Rewards is a corporate spend solution that focuses on maximizing credit card rewards. So different perspectives, but why don't we go around the horn and start off, if we could, Dave, maybe we'll have you go first. Just, what your perspective is on this trend that we're talking about, the growth of embedded payments, embedded finance within the B2B realm.
Yeah, so great question. I think when we think about embedded finance, a lot of time we think about the consumer experience, right? I want access to my banking and payments information when I'm in my car or when I'm in my kitchen on, an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home. No matter what screen I'm in front of, I sort of expect my banking information to be there. And while, years ago, we spent a lot of time going about town, and so bank branches put themselves in town, these days we spend that same amount, or if not more time, in front of our digital screens, right? And so the question is, how do payments and banking professionals think about how to embed payments into those screens? And so we think about the consumer experience. But what we're starting to see is that, in fact, there's even greater friction in the B2B experience. As we think about the enterprise experience and the number of employees of large corporations that, in fact, have to swivel chair in order to get even the simplest tasks done, that context switch creates a tremendous amount of friction, negative experience, and opportunity for really making very expensive mistakes. And so being able to create embedded experiences that go across an enterprise user or a B2B user's daily flow is super critical. And we're starting to see that catch on as a major point of emphasis and focus in financial services.
Well, certainly nobody likes expensive mistakes. Mark, what's your purview out there in Entrada? And as I said, you guys are in the real estate segment, multifamily property management.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The simple way I think about embedded finance on the consumer side is just not having to go to the bank. And as you think about that, kind of as it relates to the enterprise, like it's not having to go through your full procure to pay process, really manually issuing manual checks. It's really looking at automating those payments. And then I think, a lot of B2B businesses have this component as well that we do that's kind of B2B to C. Like, although you're contracting with other enterprises, like there's a consumer component of your business. And so that's where other things come into play, like embedded insurance, for example, selling insurance directly to the consumer, but really in kind of a B2B way. Things like embedded lending as well, kind of buy now, pay later becoming a real common thing. Again, those do have a consumer element to them as well, but there's a lot of businesses out there, including ours, that have kind of a B2B to C type motion.
And Isaac, so wow, we've heard things, it makes it not have to go to the bank. They get rid of costly mistakes. Isaac Itzkowitz, what's your view at Global Rewards? And again, this is a travel related business. It's a spend management company with a travel related rewards underlayer to it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of second Mark and David there. We're seeing a tremendous uptick in that automation that Mark talked about. Not having to go to your traditional bank or card processor to do some of the outside functionality, having the ability to do things within your technology, within your software, that is a one-click solution, having it embedded into a property management software. So you're doing all of your other accounting, you're doing everything else. You're working inside of your CRM essentially, and being able to make those payments in the format that you want to make them in really is where people are heading. They're looking at the efficiencies. They're looking at how do we embed this further? How do we get this into the crux of our processes and our flows so that we're not going to the outside parties. We're kind of bringing it all in-house, all together, utilizing the outside components. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest and uptick in our API solution, which will allow people to embed those technologies and those capabilities within their flows. One of the industries we're seeing it tremendously in is shipping, right? They're historically been using multiple different, software providers to just get their payments out. Since COVID accelerated a lot of that, there's a tremendous demand for card payments versus check and ACH. And it's kind of the way the industry has moved. Yet nobody was set up for that. So embedding it into their process is the fastest, the most clean, and streamlined process for them to do. So, like I said, I second Mark and David. We're seeing a tremendous uptick in it, and I think it's the way everybody's headed and everybody's thinking today.
Let's talk about the catalyst behind it. Like so many things, the B2B world is lags some of the consumer advances that we've seen. This is no different, but we're seeing a major bungee cord effect, a snapback, catch up. What about the headwind factor? Because I feel like every conversation I have these days, macroeconomics is part of the discussion. Is this kind of an efficiency laden tool that can pay for itself, that has all kinds of check boxes of positive features? Is this the kind of functionality that does better when times are tough, or is that not a factor?
I think the answer to that question is that it does. I think that when times get tough, people start to look at their bottom line. They start to look at where can they turn around some more, efficiency to hit their bottom line. What kind of investment am I putting in place? When things are great and people are out and spending and every business is doing well, people don't think of these things. So I think when times get tough, it forces people to look at, where do I really have efficiencies or lack thereof that I can build in and really get a good ROI out of building those efficiencies in place. And I think that that's something that people are looking at. I think it's something that people are really starting to focus on. And this is a tool, Global Rewards is a tool to get there in a very simplistic manner, where people aren't going through, terrible or difficult integrations and, a lot of back and forth, and they just upend it and say, forget it, it's too much work, I can't deal with it. We are embedding into ERPs and CRM, so people can focus more within their technologies, which also helps to further automate that. But I think overall, it's a very, very enhancing solution to what people are looking for. And I think when times get tough, I think that's when people are going to start focusing on it in a more heavier light. I know from my perspective, I've done that in the years past in other businesses where things got tough, market shifted, and we had to look at, where do we build in efficiencies of all sorts. And when you're getting into the finance phase, the embedded component is the key.
Sure. Mark's nodding. What would you say to that? The macroeconomic, inflation, rising rates, take your pick in the world of hurt. Good, bad, indifferent factor that you're seeing?
Yeah, I agree with that, with a lot of what Isaac was saying, especially around COVID-19 really being an accelerant. It accelerated the digital transformation as it relates to kind of embedded finance by not making brick and mortar an option, right? Like going to the bank was not an option. In our space, for example, there were a lot of residents who were used to mailing their rent checks to the leasing office. Well, with COVID, like the leasing office wasn't open. There was nobody there to open the mail and process the mail. And so they, went to a digital payment, whether that was ACH, credit card, debit card, really kind of embedded, kind of payment options. And then I think now, like we're seeing kind of that same mix shift, like it's held post-COVID. And I think as you think about efficiency and us, being in harder times, like it's much more cost efficient for those payments to be processed automatically than it is to have a team in a leasing center that's kind of receiving the checks, opening the envelopes, processing them, et cetera. So totally agree with what's been said by Isaac and David. I think the trend continues, and I think it's a more efficient way for payments to be processed.
I think if we weren't on a Zoom call, David would be like fist bumping or high fiving. I think you guys, when they say preaching to the choir, something like that, David?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, listen, the reason it resonates so much is because we've been talking about digital transformation and we've been talking about application modernization and all these sorts of things around efficiency for so long. And a lot of that was actually focused on being customer centric, right? Do we really understand the user and what their needs are? And for a long time, we saw this trend where, larger corporations could afford more expensive software, and so they had the more agile, deep approach to really an IT stack that met the needs of their business and their customers. And we saw this inversion of that, right? What actually happened was smaller startups and younger companies could become more agile and adopt software as a service, where larger companies were actually held back by these heavier IT stacks. And I think what's happening now is that while the consumer side has really been driven towards less context switching and more of a sort of app-centric view of taking care of that consumer experience, we're starting to see that bleed into this. The same expectations are coming over to the B2B world, where the expectation is that the software understands the needs of the user and sort of makes itself sensitive to that user and that user's context. And so that inversion is causing this whole reanalysis of large company software. And I mean, we bought a core banking system called Technisys and merged them into Galileo because it was so important for us to get that underlying infrastructure to become more modern and in the cloud and customer-centric and customer-sensitive. So if you ask me, all of the things that Mark and Isaac are talking about are really about how do you look at embedded finance in B2B from the perspective of being sensitive to the needs of the user and that context, and really getting that agility and value out of your business stack.
So we've talked, obviously, all of you guys agree that there's an appetite for efficiency and cost savings right now, but there always is. As is, there's a desire in all businesses for efficiency. But talking about the balance about the fear of disruption, like as you add new things to any ERP system that's running, especially when it has to do with touching money and the customer experience, it's nerve-wracking. And so, talk to me about balancing that. We've established also that simplicity is one of the great selling attributes for embedded finance in general. But talk to me about balancing efficiency versus fear of disruption.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here, Matt. I think that for me, part of it is, kind of making sure you're choosing the right partners. Like there's a lot of great, fintech businesses that are out there. Some of them are represented on the call here today, obviously with David here. So I think it's, picking the right partners, understanding kind of what your use case is, doing a lot of testing to make sure what you're trying to accomplish is actually being achieved. Because, to your point, like it definitely is a big change, especially, with a lot of businesses that are, mostly used to checks. Like, for example, where we are a property management system, we have the visibility, into, kind of what the volume of checks are that are being processed still to pay vendors. And it's a high percentage, like, and those are kind of B2B payments. Like, it's the majority that are still being done kind of in an old-fashioned way of checks. And so I think it is, there has to be an ROI to justify making a change. And so, like, back to my previous example, are you, not going to need as many people in a leasing office if you're processing payments electronically? I think the same thing applies in other settings, like AP payments, for example. Do you have to, are you having to scale your business to accommodate the number of AP payments that you're making? And I think if you're accomplishing some of that, in a digital way, which there's a lot of great digital solutions out there today, it can result in, kind of more efficiencies. And those employees that were working on those tasks, I think there's more, kind of meaningful things they can be doing within your organization as well.
Well, it's quite a cocktail of things there, Isaac. We were talking about efficiency and fear of disruption, and then fighting friction, all good things, customer satisfaction. What are you seeing out there when you approach a business, a new client with a spend management solution? What's the kind of vibe that you're feeling or hearing?
So I think the initial approach there's always skepticism when it comes to a new product when your business is running the way it's been running, right? But at the end of the day, we all agree that the one thing that's bad for a business is for somebody to say, "I've always done it this way," right? You have to continue to evolve with the times, and you have to continue moving forward. And I think people are very much trying to do so. I think there's that fear of, if I go and spend all this time in putting something in place, what's my ROI, right? Am I going to get it out of it? Is it just going to be another new feature which didn't really give me much, right? The unknown is what scares everybody. But we do see people in our space, and we are focused not only on the spend management but also on the AP side of our house, we do see a lot of people, a lot of interest. People want to move forward. They want to try it. They want to, explore how they can customize it to their need. It's not just, I don't know, this is, people are coming out of their shell, more so than prior to COVID. And they're looking at the solution saying, okay, maybe we really got to jump in both feet, pray for the best, do our due diligence. And if it seems good, it will be good, and get there. And our job is to make sure it's as frictionless and as easy as possible. But the general drive, I do see a tremendous uptick in when we talk to businesses, and how do we take a solution and make it better for us? How do we get this, and how do we use it in the best way possible? And I think that's going to continue to accelerate because people don't have a choice, right? You can't
Yeah.
just sit back and let the world change and be stuck outdated, right?
Let's,
We know what that translates to for a business.
I want to ask David this question because you're talking about continuing to accelerate. And I, made the point, kind of clunky, but, the fact that B2B is catching up, it's a little behind. But how green are the green fields, do you think, in embedded finance, David, right now, in terms of companies catching up? Like how, what inning are we in? It's World Series time.
Yeah.
The baseball analogy.
No, I'm glad you asked. And I definitely think, unlike the World Series, it's still the early innings, right? So, I think one of the biggest mistakes we could make is assuming that B2B users are somehow less demanding or deserving of frictionless experiences. There's sort of this feel that the purchaser in IT is sort of far away from the user, and so what we sell into B2B can be sort of less polished or less customer centric. And I think what's happening is this. I mentioned earlier this swivel chair experience, right, in the B2B context, that as consumers are becoming more demanding, we're expecting things to be more tailored to our experience. And I think the consumer experience, has defined a sort of mobile, social, local, and hyper-personalized experience. And customers in the enterprise in B2B expect the same sorts of experiences. And so even though B2B is catching up, I don't think there's any really good reason for that. I think we're very quickly coming to terms as a society where we recognize that many of us are in the workplace and many of us have many of the same challenges in the workplace. And so we expect the same level of sensitivity and sort of customer centricity around a customer 360 from my solutions that include financial services as a consumer sitting at home in front of their, using their tablet or their phone, right? So those same sorts of experiences are very quickly accelerating in B2B. But you're right, it's early innings, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to really, like Entrata and like Global Reward, to really look at what are the new opportunities in B2B services that they could offer, and really go be the first mover and get first mover advantage in those experiences. Because the first mover frequently in embedded finance wins a ton of the opportunity, right? As an example, when you're, as a consumer, when you're checking out in a big box store and they offer you point of sale finance, nobody says, oh, wait, let me check if my bank has a competing offer. Let me bring up my bank app on my phone. You either take that offer for financial services or not, right? So the first mover into that POS finance position won that customer context in that particular micro moment. And so there's this new battleground for micro moments, and it's really exciting to see how so many companies are really doing innovative things to capture the context for B2B users.
Yeah. Well, and Mark's already said that now you don't have to go to the bank because of these darn things. So that's a bonus as well. But I totally get your point. Mark, let me ask you, as Mark the CFO and Mark the consumer at Starbucks per se, do you feel that this marriage of expectations of simplicity and streamlined commerce is indeed spilling through to B2B, and agree that we're in early innings?
Yeah, 100%. Like, definitely agree with David. It's early innings. Love baseball, and we're seeing some good baseball this fall, which is great. For me, the best evidence of that, Matt, is back to kind of the vendor, kind of payments we see processed in our system. So, as a reminder, Entrata is a property management system, which means ERP is a component of what we do, and our customers are paying their vendors, kind of through our system. And so, as we kind of think about what is the overall payment mix that's happening today, It's definitely still a majority checks. And so that tells me if it's a majority checks, it's still early innings, because a big part of this digital transformation, on AP payments and AP automation is around paying more via ACH, is around paying more by things like, virtual card, et cetera. And I think it's early innings when you look at what the mix is today. It's a very small percentage where that's happening.
I just specifically like on your own business, when you get it to work once and that nervousness, like, oh geez, I hope I don't blow things up here. You get through and you're like, well, that went well. Are there like knock-on effects? Do you start looking around the company like with your CFO hat on and be like, well, wait a minute, and start looking around for other API kind of use cases that might exist?
Yeah, 100%, Matt. Like, I think, as I think about office of the CFO in general, like there's just a lot of areas, for automation around a lot of tasks that are done, whether that's, kind of around EP payments or reconciliations or things around forecasting, for example. So yes is the answer, like a lot of room to kind of accelerate some of that transformation.
Yeah, and Isaac, do you see that same thing, like have one, then soon many kind of a situation, or not?
Yeah, I definitely do see that, and just to touch on what Mark just mentioned, we are still in the early innings, and I do agree with that. With majority of payments still going out in the check format, even with the COVID accelerants, we're still seeing a tremendous amount of that, and it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? Who's going to lower the interchange? Who's going to not want to take it? And that's kind of what we run into on the AP, scale, and it's a very difficult task to tackle because and nobody's been able to really nail it yet as we've seen it, because I don't want to take a card because I'm getting hit with too much of an interchange. I want to pay you on card, right? Because it's better for me. Who's going to give in, right? And until we have a real solution for that out there, I think we're going to continuously go around in a slow effort, get people onto ACH, which is better than check, but it's still not card for a lot of B2Bs who are looking for that ROI. There's a lot of that element there, and I think that we have a lot of work to do in that arena, specifically in the AP space. And I think there's some really cool things that I think are going to come forth pretty soon, not only from Global Rewards. I think there's some other folks working on some items that could start to accelerate and move the way AP moves from check over to more digital transformations. I think there's a lot of security that comes along with that. I think there's a lot of fraud that comes along with that, which needs to be checked and monitored. But I think that we're ripe for the picking, and we just have to act on it to get it going. And I think we just need a few companies like Entrata, like Galileo, and Global Rewards together who are going to start pushing that needle forward, and then watch everybody jump on that bandwagon just because it's the way it's going to go, right? If somebody can come out with that solution, that's what everybody's waiting on, right?
Right. David's nodding. You mentioned fraud, and I want to get to that in a second. But David, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that as an industry, we have to evolve closer to real-time payments. And with FedNow and sort of the recent comments from the CFPB regarding open banking and sort of what we see happening internationally with regulatory frameworks in places like India with UPI and SPEI in Mexico and PIX in Brazil, and sort of these regulatory frameworks around real-time payments, we know that that's coming, and that's going to become the de facto customer expectation in the near future, right? And so I think at Galileo, we're accelerating that, and we're finding new and innovative ways to do that in a way that meets the needs of our customers and that is safe and, of course, works within regulatory standards and all of that. But I think it's more than just the providers, right? It also takes the participation of the ecosystem, which are companies like Global Rewards and Entrata and many more, to become a part of a real-time payments network and settlement system, which is really yet to take off as an expectation in the United States. And so as we start to head there, the idea is, of course, to accelerate as much as possible to really stay ahead of customer expectations and create those aha moments, those magic moments where customers are waiting, 3 to 5 days for their paycheck to settle, and suddenly it settles in 2 days, same day, right away, etc. Those type of experiences drive loyalty and drive customer satisfaction, and on one hand drive increased expectations, but also much better meeting the needs of customers, both in the enterprise and consumer segments.
Let's go from the aha moment to the oh no moment, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of people have said that the growth of embedded payments, embedded finance has opened up a new window, a new target, a new avenue of fraud. I can't point to any statistics or research that say this is so, other than the Clyde Darrow, I rob banks because that's where the money is, kind of a logic. Do you, my client facing guests, do you guys have any reason to believe that that's true, or just kind of a statement of the obvious sort of prediction that, knowing fraudsters the way they act, this could be a target? Mark, how do you rationalize that sort of thought process and the risk, with as the guy whose job it is to protect the castle?
Yeah, that's great, Matt. So I agree with what you said. Like, anytime there is money and payments involved, like, there is going to be a risk of fraud, and that's kind of always been the case, and that'll continue to be the case. I would say there's also a lot of innovation around minimizing the fraud that's happening as well. Simple examples that you're seeing, like electronic payments, whether that's things like Apple Pay or Google Pay. I think virtual credit cards is another good example, where you're seeing kind of one-time virtual cards where it can only be used once, and then that card number can't be used again. So, although fraud will, I think, unfortunately always be a part of, of payments, I think there is a lot of innovation around, kind of detecting that fraud as well. I think the card networks themselves have also got a lot more sophisticated around detecting fraud, kind of when and if that's happening, and alerting, consumers and businesses as well if they suspect it. So I wish I could say that, it's entirely eliminated, but it's a part of life and will continue to be a part of life.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's not. I guess I'm asking, is that you haven't seen any increase in it, right?
No,
I mean,
no, we haven't seen any increase in it, and I think too, like, there still is a responsibility of, kind of the office of the CFO to design the right, kind of processes and controls around these types of payments. So I don't think that goes away. But no is the answer, Matt. We have not seen
okay.
any uptick in this.
Yeah. Okay, it sounds like we have some our next research project here, if anybody wants to get on board that one. Isaac, did you want to add into that? Just
Yeah,
sort of this.
yeah, 100%. I think that, people talk about the uptick. Anytime you move more and more into a digital era, right? If you're processing 50 payments a month and you got 2 fraud cases, and now you're doing 300 payments a month and you got 10 fraud cases, right? There's always that balance. There's always going to be that ratio. Is the ratio going up? I don't see that happening today. But with the acceleration of digital payments, we can expect it to go up. And I think that's where a lot of people talk about it's increasing, it's increasing. It's a lot more of the awareness into, there's more automation, there's more electronic methods, there's going to be more fraud just because of where we are in the technology era. To Mark's point, utilizing single-use cards, there's even further controls that we use, which really not only allows you to use a card for a payment for, one time for a specific dollar amount, but also limiting the MCC control to that card, limiting the merchant name to that card through data enrichment processes, and building that all into your auth flow. So you're really very, very mitigated when it comes to fraud and where that card can actually be spent. So it's not necessarily that fraud is on the rise. I think we have to turn it around and look and say fraud might be on the rise because payments are on the rise. Accelerated, electronic payments are on the rise. So by default, fraud is on the rise in the same ratio. And how are we fighting it? What new tools are we coming out with to mitigate them and even beat them back to before where they were in the current environment, right? And I think that's where the innovation and some of these data enrichment processes come into place. And, with Galileo's technology and tools and goal rewards and integration, I'm sure Entrada's got some of that as well, really mitigates as best as possible. Look, you're going to have the people that are going to constantly try to hit your system from Austria and South Africa, right? How do you mitigate those hits? How do you mitigate your lockdown to your system? Where's your card information stored, right? How strong is your system? So it's not, I think people look at fraud on the rise because they're busy touting fraud is on the rise as a way to justify perhaps maybe not locking their system and mitigating their fraud the way they need to. And I think that's a big component today. It's you know, a lot of regulatory bodies are looking at it, and I think that's just that component there is on the rise, and the
Sure.
way we mitigate it is going to limit it.
It's classic rising tide theory. No, we've seen it in all sectors and industries. More
Yep.
digital commerce equals, more targets, more crime and fraud. So let me just, I don't want to go too long here, guys. I want to give you all each kind of a closing comment. Maybe we'll just go around the horn and talk a little bit about just what you see in the future going forward, given all that we've talked about, and if there's any, particular fears that jump out. We'll go Mark, Isaac, David, and wrap it up there.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I just echo what we mentioned earlier, that I think it's early innings in terms of this digital transformation, specifically on embedded payments. Like, I think that just, continues to become a bigger part of life. I think digital payments as well, things around like, Apple Pay, Google Pay that we mentioned. And then I think we continue to see more, kind of innovation in what I'll call the procure to pay space, kind of on the B2B side. Just in general, businesses have not adopted a lot of technology around procure to pay. And I think we'll continue to see that. We'll continue to see AP automation, which will translate to a lot more vendors being paid via digital payments versus, kind of legacy checks. And I think to one of David's earlier points, I think those payments get faster and faster. Like, ACHs traditionally have been, kind of 2-3 days. I think we've seen kind of next day ACHs. Now there's like this same day ACH. So I think that the
Fed now coming soon.
Yeah, I think the Fed now coming soon, like all that just gets quicker over time.
Sure. Isaac?
Yeah, I think that, just to piggyback on that, I think we are headed into an era that we think we've seen before, and I think it's only going to get better. I think that, bringing the solutions together, and I think that's been a little bit of the, broken part of the system, is that everybody's focused on their niche and then going to a business and saying, you need this because of this. And the next guy coming and saying, you need this because of that. When you're talking about embedded finance, you need to come to a business, and what we've seen is you need to come to them with, this is your issue, this is your industry, this is going to solve all of your finance issues and your automation across the board. Now, that's a very broad statement, and I understand that. But when you're talking about card specific, AP specific, they're looking for that. They don't want to deal with one provider for their corporate card and spend, and another one for, they want everything kind of centralized into one place. And that's kind of what we built. And we built the AP through the spend management all into one place, and it's an a la carte system. So we're seeing a tremendous, interest, an uptick in interest over the last 12 months in that regard, where people are saying, you know what, let me get rid of some of the legacy banks that I've been using and only using for this component and only using for that component, and kind of, like I said, interested in creating better efficiency for their AP team, for their controllers, department, and bringing it all together so the reporting is together, my money's together, my spend is together. Here's everything in one little bundle, reconciled to your ERP. And I think that's where we're continuing to head. And like we talked about the check, I think the check is a big sticking point for a lot of companies. I think it's the companies that don't know how to get around it or aren't getting approached by the right companies to get around it. I think that's where a lot of the friction is. And do I start switching out to a more modern process that may not end up resulting in any ROI, right? I might just put all this money in converting and get no return, and get no rebate, get no efficiency, because I still have to go through. I think that's where people's concerns are. So as we continue to move forward, look, there's a lot of great companies out there on the market. There's a lot that are trying to solve pain points for specific needs. And I think that we're all right in there together in who's going to come out with that first, like David mentioned earlier, who's going to come out with that first component to tackle that specific need, right? And then everybody will try to get behind it and figure that component out. And I think, I'm excited to see what's to come. I think we've come a long way. We're untapped to this point. I think there's so much more that people are within their innovation are going to come forth with, and it'll be interesting to see.
It will be interesting to see what David Fuhrer, our cleanup hitter, has to say with his closing remarks. We've been waiting for this, Dave.
Try my best.
Grand slam time.
So I think, first of all, top of mind for me is the adoption speed of embedded finance, right? I think if we look at when credit cards and that whole model started in Fresno, California in 1958, it took a decade plus of time to really start catching on. And what's happening now is that with APIs and the internet and the pervasiveness of connectivity, we're really seeing sort of the next generation of finance, this embedded finance model, really happening at internet speed, which is super exciting, but also a little bit scary. So to your point, striking the balance between convenience and security is a huge challenge. I think we don't see an uptick in fraud. We see more creative fraud. And so what we've actually found is that the old model, the spreadsheet model and sort of the rules model of preventing fraud doesn't work in embedded finance. The only thing that we found that works is really machine learning at scale. So how can you really start to identify those trends and identify customers across products and really start to look at a consortial model across multiple behaviors, so you can start to take those behaviors and learn from them and offer those back to our clients. So that's a key part of embedded finance, and taking advantage of the speed of embedded finance is doing it carefully. I think lastly, we sometimes forget that the underlying fabric, these underlying threads of APIs are what makes all of this work. It's how the software talks to software. And so if I think about developers as sort of the pilots, right, bringing these huge airplanes full of customers to these APIs through applications, right? If you're not building APIs and partnering with companies that have APIs that take care of the entire embedded finance stack of all of the needs of your business, pilots don't stop being pilots just because the pilot seat is uncomfortable, but they may change and fly to another airline, right? They may fly for another airline. So the way I think about it is like, if you're not thinking about, as a provider anyway, if you're not thinking about embedded finance in terms of the developer experience and how developers can leverage all this functionality across your stack to get what they need done, they're going to go to another stack. So top of mind for me when it comes to embedded finance is, what do developers need? How do our clients and customers want to use Galileo and Technisys to build new compelling offerings? And how can we create the API so that we facilitate that ecosystem of developers? That's top of mind for me. That's the number one thing I think about every day when I wake up.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for coming on. Galileo's David Fuhr, also Mark Hansen, CFO at Entrata, and our founder and CEO of Global Rewards, Isaac Itzkowitz. Guys, thanks. Fun chat. Gave me a lot of ideas for future discussions, but we'll have to get to those another day. Thanks again for coming on Payments. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Matt.